gentlemen. Everybody, just letting you know that I am recording this. I will have to ask Ian how to actually upload this to an accessible space once all is said and done, because that's not my area of expertise. But I'm welcoming everybody joining this space today. I am extremely excited to be talking about the book that I've been definitely talking to quite a few people about, and some people have already gotten it, and anyone who has, thank you. So I guess as a very brief overview, the main part of this book is my memoir, is really my life story that kind of gives the reader some context about how did I come to be on this side of the table and what things about that context not only are relevant, but really more than anything kind of explain how did I get here. So the first part of the book really is my memoir. It's my life story, really kind of capturing and really highlighting how every twist and turn in the plot, whether they were positive or whether they were negative, came away and brought to me some type of a lesson, a message, or connection. Anybody who ever has talked about DBT probably understands that concept, right? I see life as a series of whip stitches, right? How anybody who's ever sewn before, right? That you kind of go a little bit forward and then a little bit back and then a little more forward and a little more back and so on and so forth, and kind of really weaving the story together. So where I begin is really about the context of my family. I am born to people who were raised by people who survived the Great Depression. And further back, people who had fled from other countries, from, various places around the globe due to religious persecution. I do have great-grandparents who literally fled from like Warsaw during the Great World War and all of that. So, really trying to prevent themselves from being targeted for who they were and how the type of faith that they had. But I'll say the culmination of all of them are, I guess the easiest way to say it is a bunch of in-laws and outlaws, right? Every last one of them had very strong stock, very resilient people. And yet in that resilience, because they were each and every last one dealing with and I would say trying to navigate fear, that was a very prominent theme throughout my family lineage, right? So how I came to understand my place in this family tree is that I know that even though the types of adversity that I may have faced were very different than my forefathers and mothers, again, lessons, messages, and connections. So I know that within my own family, that my nuclear family, each and every one of us, I'm sure everybody knows about family roles of types, right? So I know that for me, I am definitely being the youngest of two kids. I have bits and pieces of the mascot, the humorous, comic relief. But I know that parts of me are also the family hero. Parts of me are also, to some extent, scapegoat, as was my brother. We've both gotten our different types of trouble as we were growing up. And I often lived in his shadow, which is another piece that's very deeply captured in the book. Just in a quick, I guess, synopsis, my brother was a bit of a hellion. He taught me how to use profanity when I was about 18 months old, and that was some chestnuts that were, I would say, talked about quite a bit. I made very memorable impressions on pediatricians, let's put it that way. My brother thought it was hysterical. I just wound up turning my mom's face red. So that being said, as we both got older and he kind of got into more prominent and pattern trouble, I always had to prove myself as I am not him. I am not the hellion that you're used to seeing. And unfortunately, many of the teachers that I had going through school also had him. So they were expecting from the get-go that I was a hellion. I'm like, no, really not. So kind of had to almost overcompensate and really show that I was able to have self-control, that I was able to pay attention and actually do the work in class and things like that. To the point where eventually some of the teachers that I worked with started to not necessarily see me as his little sister. So as far as relationships in my family of origin, I know both my parents had their own types of trauma. They may not have been fleeing the Holocaust, but they were raised by grandparents who fled the Holocaust. And corporal punishment was a really big thing that was really not discouraged back in that day. I know my folks have several aces, let's just say. So the, what is it, a fight, flight, freeze, fawn, right? I know that each and every one of us had our own approaches. And I know for me, I was probably more inclined toward, I would say, fight and then fawn. Whereas each and every one of us had our own kind of like almost melded, almost enmeshed type of responses when conflicts would arise. So going past my family of origin, I detail in the book really about types of trauma that I've experienced. I know that when I did the trauma-informed care training, I shared to the group that I have 5 aces. There's 10. So I got half of them, right? So that being said, I kind of talk a little bit more about that, you know, in addition to family of origin issues, which was really more specifically about like emotional neglect, emotional abuse. I myself was never physically abused or sexually abused by family of origin, but I know that my folks did experience those kinds of things. And how that kind of, I will say, manifested, really made itself evident that I then, because of all of that internalized negative self-image, I was a moving target when I was in school. I was bullied horribly because I was smaller than my classmates, I was heavier than my classmates, things like that. So, but I was smarter than them. So I think I may have put the turn of phrase in there, if you can't beat them, confuse them. I would throw out the SAT words and they would walk by and insult me, and then they would have no idea I completely insulted them, and I just kind of snicker on my way away, you know. But the bullying was definitely something that kind of really stuck with me and really, I will say, left me in a very vulnerable state. So eventually, when I was in high school, I then detail about how not only was my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, one of my biggest supporters while she was still alive and then after that, but she really was a part of how I eventually kind of came to realize that filling the cups of others is great, but you have to fill yours too. So around when I was approximately, I can't remember, it was 14 or 15, I was like a sophomore in high school, how I eventually started to turn the tide was, and I had no idea scientifically what I was actually doing at the time, but something told me, whatever it is you're hearing from all of these naysayers, all of these negative people, start telling yourself the opposite. So I started a ritual daily of affirmations twice a day, saying things in my mirror to myself of things that were positive about me. I started with the things on the inside, which were a lot easier for me to own, right? That I was clever, sense of humor, things like that. But then I knew I eventually had to push my challenge line to start adding the outside. And once I really started incorporating that into the mirror mantras or mirror magic or whatever you want to call that, that's when my confidence really started to steadily rise. So I kind of detail that, like, I didn't know the science behind that, but what I was actually doing was literally reprogramming my own subconscious beliefs. So that was really the biggest turning point that I detailed in the story. It took me time. I mean, I started in like sophomore year of high school and I continued that on a daily basis, twice a day, until I was maybe a second semester freshman in college. But by that time, I had gone from a self rating of 3. Not too good of a starting point, right? But by the time I hit college, I hit a 10. And I, at that point, didn't necessarily have that same bullseye on my forehead. People stopped approaching me in that kind of more like bullying type of way because I think part of them could tell you're barking up the wrong tree. You picked the wrong one, right? And that confidence then translated into what am I going to do with this? So I know I'm whip stitching, so I'm going to kind of backtrack right before the point at which I started doing the affirmations is a funny anecdote on how I actually came to understand what was my path, what was my mission, or what was going to be my calling. So I was, I think it was earlier in that sophomore year, my brother threw a party. My brother, mind you, is 3 years older than me. And my folks, being children of the 60s who kind of clawed their way out, kicking and screaming, we were kind of a party house. Like my folks, and like as long as they're not driving, nobody cared, right? So my brother threw a party and he had his friends over. And mind you, they're all older than me and they had beer, wine coolers, all this kind of stuff, high school kind of party. And I eventually invited some of my friends over and side fact, I've never actually ever found the smell or taste of beer appetizing, but that was all that was left. They had drank all the wine coolers, much to my, chagrin. So I decided to seek out something that actually was palatable tasting because I wanted to join in the festivities. So what I found was a bottle of Scope mouthwash. Yep, exactly. So, I saw the face, Wendy. So I decided hey, it's minty, it's fresh, let's give it a shot. So I gave it a shot. This was like 3/4 of a bottle, about yay big. So didn't stay down long, but once my mother caught wind of this, she, I would say, jumped to a conclusion that at the tender age of like 13, 14, that I was a Skid Row alcoholic. Let's just say a touch of projection because I am an adult child of 2 addicts. So she immediately felt the compulsion to put me in therapy. So I decided, I'm like, okay, hey, let's give this a whirl. Let's find out. So as soon as I met this therapist, Mary Lou, who actually became one of my mentors, she was able to catch on pretty quick. I was not at the end of my ever fraying rope. And I started picking her brain about what did she do and how did she become who she is and what she does. And she entertained my questions. And she told me about social work. And years later, here I am. So thank you to Mary Lou as one of those guideposts that helped me whip stitch forward to kind of find the right niche for me. So yeah, that's how I actually came to understand that social work was the most direct route for me to be to actually do this type of work. So fast forwarding past college, I really talk about how once I learned about confidence, once I understood that part of being this type of helper, healer, is to observe. When I was in college, I witnessed a lot of very dysfunctional people. I lived in a suite with 5 young ladies, all of which put the hellion that my brother was to shame, okay? Paling in comparison to him. So they did crazy antics like stealing stuff from the dining halls off the roof. They called it the cookie caper. They invited me to join along, but thankfully something told me don't go with them, and I didn't. And then they wound up on the front of the school paper the very following day, arrested. I'm like, oh, good thing I didn't go with them. One of them actually took a shirt from one of our suite mates and doused it with hairspray and set it afire and threw it on the couch. I was asleep. I had no idea they were doing this. Thankfully, they had the presence of mind to knock on my door and wake me up. I'm like, y'all set this fire, y'all put it out. There's the fire extinguisher. I'm going back to bed. And so I let them figure it out. But these women that I was housed with really became the very infancy stage of field research, right? I literally was like the historian, really just drinking all of this in, because all of them were playing with drugs and alcohol. All of them were into crazy antics. Some of them literally damn near lost their financial aid because of how impulsive they were. But I knew, I'm like, this is my jam. And so once I kind of realized my path through school of doing applied social science and then social work, I then knew this was where I was meant to be. This is what I was built for. Right, the descendant of in-laws, outlaws, vagrants, gypsies, and all of the above. And apparently I must be a bit higher functioning than quite a few of them, or else I likely would not have survived as long as I have in the field. So I then talk a little bit in my books about the various jobs I've had. I have a 3-page resume. There's a lot to tell, but I will say that some of the highlights were definitely when I eventually got my first job. My first job, I was working in a day treatment for the developmentally delayed. And I will say that for the strengths I have as a clinician, this was not a good fit. This was just my start, because the day treatment really had very low functioning individuals, right? These were, in the old vernacular, severe and profoundly mentally retarded. So for many of these people, what we did in our role was we were the hub of the wheel, pulling all the disciplines together, PTOT, nursing, all this, right, to get treatment plans done, right? An example of a goal that some of these individuals would have for a year's time was to visually track an object for 30 seconds. Y'all have met me. This is way beyond what I can really bring the real strength to, besides compiling treatment plans. So I knew that that wasn't going to be the end of it. So eventually I decided from that first job to try my hand in substance abuse treatment. And thank God I did, because I learned very quickly that being an ACOA, this was not a good fit. Within about 90 days, being a senior counselor at an IOP that had a residential component, I crashed and burned. The S-curves that I know Mike likes to talk about, right? Mm-hmm. So I realized that running the groups and doing the individuals and all of that with people who had primarily just, I mean, from my understanding, primarily substance abuse issues, my ACOA stuff started hitting me like a Mack truck. I felt like the deer in the headlights, that I knew that if I continued on in that role, that I would likely wind up inadvertently breaking the cardinal rule of do no harm. Not that I would have physically lashed out, but I would not have necessarily given my best, or I may have inadvertently been passive aggressive about it. So I told my boss about it. And thankfully, they were very rooted in the 12-step foundations, and they were like, I understand what you're telling me. Go do your 90 and 90. I'm like, Al-Anon. So I wound up taking her advice, and I got myself in the rooms, and I got myself a sponsor, and I still have those books. Now we're 20 some odd years old, still in my office, and occasionally I read a page a day when I have clients who have the codependency and ACOA issues. So that crashing and burning, that S-curve, led me to take a departure from the field. I was working as a medical assistant. I did temp work. All these things that I was so fish out of water, not my fit. And then eventually, long story short, I eventually met who is now my husband. His mother and him were the supports that I really needed at that time that I took this departure from the field. To kind of realize you need to, you know what, don't take this extended hiatus and sabbatical from the field. Like, pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and give it another shot. So with that support, I finally got my feet back under me, and I applied for jobs. And the one that answered, and this is probably the biggest synchronicity I think I could ever detail ever of my life, was the one that answered the call, was a place called Brunswick Hall. Brunswick Hall at that time was an inpatient psychiatric facility. They had pediatric, adolescent, and adult and geriatric. This place, 12 years prior, was a substance abuse rehab that my father graduated from when I was probably about 14. Talk about synchronicity. I'm like, okay, this is the place. So I hit the ground running. I got right back into the role and I learned a lot. Working inpatient, diagnostics really became one of my really, I'd say, deepest strengths besides QI. They used to lock me in a room with all the charts when the auditors would be coming around to make sure everything was signed, all the T's are crossed, all the I's are dotted, right? But that was where I learned that diagnostics and QI were something that I had a really deep affinity for, and I actually really enjoyed it. But another bully made themselves apparent at Brunswick Hall, and that was the director of psychiatry, Dr. Khan. He, in his usual bombastic, quasi-narcissistic style, would run rounds. And anytime anybody would chime in during rounds to talk about the clients and patients, and discharge planning and estimated length of stay and all that, usually would cut us to ribbons. This man would make me cry on a regular. And so eventually I realized, I'm like, you know what? I've bucked myself up before and gotten my confidence. I need to remember who the heck I am. So one day after rounds, in his usual style of cutting into us and including me, I pulled him aside. And in that private space, I rattled off his 5-axis diagnosis to his face. He was kind of dumbfounded and impressed. Not only that I had the balls to stand up to him, but that I knew what the hell I was talking about. From that day on, he never tested me again. And to this day, this man will sign anything I put under his nose. In fact, he was part of how I was able to get my 5 years vouched for when I moved here from New York. Being confident and standing your ground was a lesson that needed a reminder. So I talk about many other jobs that I've had and how I kind of learned about what I wanted out of this work versus deal breakers. One of those deal breakers, which thankfully no role since that role ever asked of me, was transporting clients in my car. Yeah. Or having to move clients into and out of, physically moving them into and out of seats and wheelchairs and all this kind of stuff, because let's just say I wound up clinically lopsided doing that. So that was one of my first jobs. Yeah. So no more of that. I've been in the field a bit too long and I'm a little longer in the tooth and I'm not doing that anymore. So I then talk a bit more about how I eventually came to an agency that was gracious enough to present to and offer to their staff DBT training. That was Lifespan. Thank God for that, because it was in 2014 and now this is what, going on 11 years that I have had that foundation. And I do not do it to chart the trademark of the actual fidelity to the model. I never will, and that's okay, right? But I definitely have gotten a lot of not only personal mileage out of using these tools, because part of how I'm able to talk about them in a way that really resonates and in a way that really lands with the clients I serve is because I tell them, I've used every last tool I'm teaching you. The only way I know that they don't work is if they're sitting in your toolbox and gathering dust. So, you ready? Let's do this. So, I then kind of talk a little bit about the culture shock of moving here, right? So, I will definitely say that I am so grateful every day that we moved here from New York. Because, let's just say, being an empath, living in a sardine can full of millions of people who are sick of being around each other was a bit much. So I really didn't know exactly what to expect when I moved here. But I will say I was immediately very pleasantly surprised when eventually my husband and I moved in briefly with my mom and then got our own home, the welcome wagon. Like my jaw hit the floor. People bought, like, bringing us little baskets with like fruit breads and welcome to the neighborhood. And I'm like, we ain't in Kansas anymore. I was so surprised and so amazed that I was so used to that New York sensibility that the only time you heard from your neighbors was loudly, and if your garbage cans were too close to their house, you parked a little too close to their driveway. I was like, wow, what? Wow. So very grateful that I migrated and imported to this local region every day. But then I talk a little bit more beyond the culture shock about, I will just term this very briefly, my spiritual awakening, right? I was raised very, like, I guess parenthetically with religion. Like, my family we were really not that great as being Jewish, right? I was born that way, but not really raised that way. I love bacon and I ain't giving it up, right? Don't do the kosher thing, never will. But aside from the books, the spiritual awakening is really a big part of, I guess, the leveling up that I can say that I've gotten more acclimated to. Especially in the last, I'd say about 3 years of working in this field. And it's actually in the very acknowledgement of my book, were it not for my maternal grandmother who passed in '04, kind of like nudging me, lovingly, but kind of like poking me, saying, well, I had this limiting belief. How can I write a book? I work full time. I serve clients day in, day out. And her rebuttal to that was, you got no people who no-show you all the time. What are you waiting for? You can write this book on their dime and on their equipment when you have people that don't show up. And if you keep waiting, you're going to forget half the crap you want to put in your book. I'm like, that's a fair point, Grandma. So from that moment on, which, mind you, was only last year, I started writing that in May of 2024. And once I took those training wheels off and got rid of that limiting belief that I can't work full time and write a book, it poured out. And there it is. And I'm grateful for that. You know, I knew that when she crossed over all that time ago, it kind of changed how I understood the process of grief, and also how I understood what happens after we cross over, right? So fun fact that's also in the book is when we moved here in 2011, we moved in the warmer months. We used one of those pods. I'm sure you all heard the pods, like a trailer. You just kind of unload the stuff, right? So we were unloading the pod into the garage so we could then get the items in the boxes into the house. And it was warm. And I took a break because it was a lot of crap we had to move. And when I took that break, I found a bag that had a whole chock full of photos from our wedding, which was in 2003. And as soon as I came across a photograph of my grandmother dancing with my grandfather at the wedding, I felt like somebody put me in the freezer. And I stopped. And I looked around. And I'm like, glad y'all got a chance to come see our new digs. I felt her presence. And I'm very reality-based, so I know I'm not like having a psychotic break at the age of 50 something, right? I'm like, that just changed the game. So how I now understand, conceive of, and speak about grieving changed. I will speak about that experience when somebody is telling me that they feel like, you know, they can't have that connection. I'm like, oh, but you can. You absolutely can. And in fact, they'll appreciate it because it's not like they ain't watching and hanging around. So you might as well, right? So at the conclusion of the point of the book that is about my life story and bringing you up to current day and the job that I have here, I then launch into the spiel. It details from start to finish that if you are the client in my office, from the very point where I start after the treatment plan of teaching the person about fight or flight, that one pager from Therapist Aid, I'm sure most of you have seen it, right? The one pager about fight or flight response, like this is the why you're feeling the way you're feeling. Because I'm sure most of you know the subdivision of population that I serve are the traumatized. And a lot of like other alphabet soup on top of that, the BPD, the MDD, all that, right? So after teaching them this is the why you're feeling the way you're feeling, and I make sure there's no questions about that, I launch right into relaxation skills. This is belly breathing. This is grounding, right? And this is progressive muscle relaxation and imagery. Like these are the physical foundational skills that are going to help you to get control over your body. Bottom up. When fight or flight has got you in the grip. So following that, I then detail how I then teach clients about distress tolerance. How do you ride the wave of those really big, intense feelings safely without making everything around you worse, right? Stop, tip, pros and cons, distractions, the accepts menu, right? Self-soothe and improving the moment and radical acceptance, right? Then I kind of just detail how I talk about emotion regulation, ABC please, opposite action, problem solving, sleep hygiene, nightmare protocol. Then interpersonal effectiveness, our dear man skills, right? Give and fast. And then finally, mindfulness skills. How do you keep yourself rooted in the present, head over your rear end as far as where you're focusing, as opposed to wandering down memory lane where you already know a whole bunch of terrible things happen to you, or going too far down the yellow brick road into the future where you're assuming more terrible things are going to happen to you. You rob yourself of any possibility of peace of mind when you take yourself away from the present. That's why it's the gift, right? Then, after all of the pillars of the DBT, that's when I kind of go a little off menu. I talk about the 4 R's from Brain Lock, Dr. Schwartz, right? What is it? Hold on. I have it flagged. I sometimes forget the actual 4 R's themselves, but I teach them fairly often when I know people have the OCD types of tendencies. So, oh yeah, relabel, right? It's an obsessive thought. It's a compulsive urge. Right? It's not a flaw of your character, right? It's not a defect. Then after we relabel, it's reattribute. Why do you keep having this obsessive thought and compulsive urge? You have a glitch in your gearbox. That glitch is trauma. It's hijacked your brain, right? So once we reattribute, then we refocus. This is the most important step, right? You do something else, anything else than what that urge is pulling you to do for at least 15 minutes. I'm like, hey, you want to pull from distress tolerance? You got tons of menus. As long as you're doing that thing for 15 minutes, fabulous. If the urge is still nagging at you after the 15 minutes, lather, rinse, repeat the same activity for 15 minutes or pivot to a different one until it shuts up. Once it finally shuts up, then the final step is revalue. Revalue is to devalue the obsessive thought, the compulsive urge. This is a bunch of brain fart noise. I need to stop giving my attention, my energy, and my direction to, right? So, 4 R's from Brain Lock. I also talk a little bit about exposure trials and exposure protocols. I've used those quite a few times, and what I've learned is that it can be very useful to start in virtuo. We are in the information age. There's YouTube clips that darn near anything, right? So if, say, somebody has feared stimulus X, start in virtuo. 10, 15 seconds of exposure to that stimulus on a video, right? If you can put it up on your TV screen, make it look more immersive, great. But while you're exposing yourself, you're using your relaxation skills. Then we ramp it up to 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 2 minutes, so on and so forth. If they can tolerate about 15 minutes or better, maybe half an hour of that feared stimulus on a video, then you bring it in vivo into real life. And I've learned that through using that progression, it can really help quite dramatically in having that person be able to tolerate the feared stimulus and to eventually not necessarily, some clients I've worked with have actually not even needed certain medications that were helping specifically with that phobia. So that's the exposure trials. And then lastly, the final part as far as off-menu skills that are not DBT, I talk about red pen letters. Red pen letters are probably one of my favorite things to talk about because I've written my share of them in my life. The red pen letter, for those who are harboring, whether it's resentments, grudges, whatever, of whoever hurt you, harmed you in whatever way, you're basically writing to that person with no intention of sending the letter. You're going both barrels blasting, no censorship, until you ain't got nothing left to say. You pour it out. If you so decide you want to then clean that up using your Dear Man into a safe to send version, great. Use I statements, that kind of stuff. Sure, why not? But the red pen letter is kind of that way of purging. It's kind of a bit different than just journaling, but you're literally addressing the person in question. So I've found that for myself and for clients, I've shared the idea of using those so that they can be quite valuable. And I statements, I think that's the last thing I talk about in the book. So that's pretty much the bulk of the content. I did want to leave time for like Q&A and what have you in case anybody has any specific questions or, you know, any kind of impressions or thoughts about what I've shared. So, I mean, like I had said to Mike and the drug rep in here before this whole thing started, I'm like, this is my first talk on this book, but I know it's not going to be my last. So hopefully it was digestible. And hopefully it was informative and hopefully enjoyable. So I open the floor if anybody has questions. Thank you. Thank you. Questions, comments, insights?
Just the names of the books.
Oh, the names. Oh, my bad. The names of the books.
Yeah.
The title of the book is Adventures in Emotional Alchemy. You can't even make this bleep up. I have all of the links actually up on this laptop that I can maybe put in an email and share if you guys are interested. So this was the first book that I wrote. I do have a sequel to this book called Adventures in Spiritual Alchemy. The Journey Continues. And the other book that I wrote was kind of a very simplified version of this called The Tale of the Glowing Dot, which I guess if I had to synopsize is kind of like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer meets near-death experience and finding your purpose. It's got AI pictures, it's cute, right? So, and it's definitely more tailored for younger audiences, right? But yeah, if anybody wants the book links, I'd be happy to share those on an email. Or I don't know if I can maybe even, can I put them in the chat? I think I can put them in the chat.
I don't see why not.
I can put them in the chat.
Yeah.
Let me do that. So, oh, Wendy, go for it.
So I discovered the red pen. Oops, can you hear me?
Say that again.
Oh, can you hear me?
Hold up. Why is it? Hold on. Try it again.
Maybe you can't hear me.
I can't hear you. What is going on?
I've had.
Hold on. Let's go with.
I can hear you. Some people can maybe hear you, Wendy.
Some people can.
Settings. Wait.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Audio.
So the people who are.
Speakers.
Interesting.
LGTV. Okay, go ahead, Wendy. Try again.
So I'm continuing to talk. You got me?
Yeah, no, now I can actually hear you.
I discovered the red pen letter as an example. I discovered it on my own. I personally have come from a dysfunctional family, a mean stepmother, and a narcissistic father. Both of them are dead now. but I had to go visit them, and there was no way that I was going to be able to be in their presence with all the anger and hatred and frustration that I was experiencing. So I decided that I was going to do a red pen letter, and I did it fervently. It took many hours, and when I discovered that I was repeating myself, then I stopped and I said, leave in the past what belongs in the past, because all of the things were examples of the horrors that I had experienced from them. And then I took it, and it was 4 pages, front and back, and I burned it in my fireplace so that when the things came up as I was getting on the plane, I would have that visual to say, no, that's already been burned. It's in the past. I got this. From now on, I'm approaching the whole relationship from an empowered, I can say what needs to be said if something comes up in the present, but nothing in the past is going to come and color what I'm experiencing right now. So it was extremely powerful. And when we've had Meds only people, I've described this to them, and whatever your method, if it's burning or if it's tearing it into a lot of little pieces and putting it under the ground, or if it's flushing it down the toilet, whatever needs to happen to this horrible, swear words and really emotional expulsion. And then it was done. And I was completely free. And I just would see the burning papers. I still can see the burning papers and know that I'm free. So a great technique.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Wendy. Yeah, burying it, burning it. I think I've even talked about put it in a helium balloon and send it up to the heavens. However you want to release it, release it. Absolutely. Love that. Anyone else? Questions?
Yeah, I got one. Have you had the opportunity to talk to your mentor, the therapist?
Actually, the last time that I ever reached out was when I graduated social work school. Mm-hmm. And I let her know, thank you. Appreciate you. Mm-hmm. Now it's my turn. I'm going to take the torch and run with it. But not recently. To be honest, I'm not sure if she still is in the field. I don't know. I have not looked her up, but I'm gonna. You mentioned her for a reason. I was meant to hear that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
But yeah, social work school was the last time I reached out, and I'm like, guess what? You remember me?
It's also so nice just having those positive people that kind of point you and believe in you and kind of show you something different, especially when you've grown up in such a toxic environment. And that's kind of like one of my mottos as a therapist. It only takes one. It only takes one person to believe in our clients and to have that impact on their life. And sometimes you can feel like, oh, well, you don't make a difference, but it obviously just, your mom thought something was wrong, but like you said, it
was a Skid Row alcoholic.
It was meant for you to be there, and how just that one person changed the trajectory of your life. So
everything.
I think that was pretty cool.
She was my most specific mentor with regard to this field, but she was not my only mentor. I also mentioned him in my book, my high school choir teacher. I don't know if anybody's ever seen the movie Mr. Holland's Opus.
Yes.
That was
Richard Dreyfuss.
That was loosely based on his life.
Yes.
Loosely based on his life. Ronald Cohen. He's actually the only person I name by name in the book. He was, back then I used to think he was militant about how he instilled discipline, practice, listening to your part and learning it and really being able to blend and harmonize. I've listened recently to some of the CDs, this is how old it was, of our high school choir concerts. We do not sound like children. And it is because of that militant discipline, right? I still love singing to this day. I just never did anything vocationally with it. So,
Wow.
but yeah, I was lucky enough to have two. Actually, maybe three. High school psychology teacher, Mr. Salzman. He was very strange. He was fascinating, and he definitely got my interest peaked in psychology. But thank God I didn't become a psychologist. I'd be bored. Like, testing would have been like snooze fest, but yeah. Any other questions? Comments?
How have you found sharing this book with your clients? Have they kind of related to it, or what has been the response for those who have read it?
A couple of clients have gotten the book. And I know that I kind of looked this up in the Code of Ethics of Social Workers. Like, I would never require anybody that I'm working with to buy the book. But I have mentioned, especially to some of my clients who are toward graduation, well, you remember the spiel I gave you way back when we were building your toolbox? Well, it's in there if you want it, if you feel led to get it. And actually, a couple of those that have gotten the book, have now since graduated. So yeah, it's neat, and I do, and especially for some of my newer clients that I have learned from maybe only a couple of meetings that they enjoy writing. I will say, like, well, by the way, just you see those, because all three of the books are on my desk. Like, writing's very cathartic. I can speak from experience. They are available on Amazon if you so feel led, but writing helps. Most definitely helps. So I probably have at least a couple of budding writers on my caseload right now. So
Have you ever used the library that do like events where you can kind of do?
as I said, right now there is a library under construction in the town I live in. And as soon as they break ground and have books in the place, I fully intend on canvassing them and asking them about not only carrying my book, but potentially allowing me to do a book talk there.
Yeah.
So, as I said, this is the first but not the last.
Yeah.
So,
Can you speak to, and you and I have talked about this, that you're talking about you're leading to write a book, and I think this is intertwined, that in terms of that the book is towards a certain audience, right, a population, and so talking about your professional journey, I guess, and how you're kind of the S-curve, how you're kind of like your new S-curve, and how you're kind of turning a corner, and even like a new population that you want to target professionally.
yes.
So can you speak to that?
Absolutely. That's kind of like more toward the conclusion of the book, and actually more so in the sequel to this book, the Adventures in Spiritual Alchemy, The Journey Continues. What I have intuited, I think is the best word to use. What I have intuited from this whole journey of writing the books is that I know the time will be soon coming that I will likely depart the role of being a therapist. I've been in the trenches almost 30 years. And in any way that I have had the opportunity to perhaps impart some of what I've amassed as far as wisdom over the time that I've been doing this, it's going to be time soon that I kind of pass the torch to the next generation of the young guns to step up and carry the torch, right? So what that intuition has definitely shown me is that part of my next path in this field is to not only help helpers as opposed to the clients en masse, but I know eventually this is also going to likely also evolve further into being a bit more involved in a different type of enterprise, one that is definitely more holistic in nature. I am not knocking Western medicine. It has been a part of my journey for a very long time, and part of the wisdom that I've more recently understand is that there's a lot of very ancient ways that are not about pills, about herbalism, naturopathy, reflexology, right? Even things like acupuncture, moxibustion, right? as far as physical ways of healing, in addition to, spiritual and or, like energy healing, things like that. And I do talk about this definitely more so in my second book, the sequel, but that what I've also learned is that probably for most of my career, I wasn't even aware of the fact that when I have in what I've called intuitions, when I'm in a room with a client, is that more than half the time it's channeling right through here and I'm just the mouthpiece. Because I know there have been times that I have been talking to a client, and I know, Wendy, you share one of them, and I know she probably told you about this, that words came out of my mouth that never would otherwise. I make very clear in just when I talk, you guys know, I'm from the East Coast, I'm from New York. The words all hat, no cattle came out of my mouth when talking to a client about self-esteem issues, like form and no substance, right? Those were not my words. I know full steam ahead that those were not my words. They came from somewhere and it was not me, but it hit the bullseye. She understood exactly what that meant, even though I didn't completely at first. So another, I guess, element of this is that I've learned that I've been channeling a lot, that there have been awarenesses and intuitions that have not been my own, that have come out my mouth. I am like the transmitter. I am completing a circuit. And it helps a lot with the heavy lifting. I'll put it that way. Right? Because I, as a human, am not all seeing, all omnipotent, all powerful. No, not at all. But apparently I am good at completing a circuit. So that, I think, is also a part of what this next phase, this next eventual enterprise is going to be about. Like bringing together different types of holistic and ancient knowledge about wellness and about healing, and collaborating with certain other like-minded individuals to create something that is less about sick care and more about wellness. So.
I was just gonna say that I appreciate, Marnie, how thoughtful that you are, and I think that that has helped you make meaning from all of your life experiences, but also helps you be a better therapist too. Just like, nothing's really a coincidence. You're in certain places and meeting certain people. And so I think I just like your outlook. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Can you also speak to, because as we know, the personal affects the professional, and the personal, what we're going through, our journeys, influences what we bring into the clinical room, of course.
Definitely.
And so I'm curious about, you talked a bit about your spiritual journey a bit, and so I'm just curious how that influenced your professional journey, and when you started to make a decision to integrate that into the clinical work, and how receptive clients have been, and how that even fits into DBT perhaps, or doesn't fit into, or complement, or, so can you speak to that?
The word is it augments.
Augments.
I'm still me. I'm still me, and I'm still spinning the tools. And when there are junctures or moments where perhaps I almost for a moment like pause, if something's coming to me and it feels like I'm chomping at the bit, I gotta say it, it's usually not me. And I will say for probably the lion's share of my caseload, it always hits the bullseye and they are always very receptive. And some clients have even commented that since I have been more open about sharing that component, the spiritual component, because it's biopsychosocial spiritual, right? It's not religious, it's spiritual. And yes, DBT actually has prayer in the Improve the Moment menu.
Is that right?
But I make very clear, I'm not here to impose or endorse any kind of a religion. And I say, I'm like me, myself, I'm really not religious, I am spiritual. But I do encourage them to, like, whatever they think is out there that's bigger than them, tune into it, ask it for help, clarity, a sign, ask it to turn things over to it, right? So, but once I started really incorporating that, I would say any client who is not either a hardcore atheist or, and then usually it won't come, I don't generally tend to find myself channeling as much when I'm in the room with an atheist. And let's just say it's been a minute since I've actually been treating somebody who's been harmed by a member of the cloth, but I have. Very receptive, absolutely receptive. So, but yeah.
Was that something you had to give yourself permission to do? Because the field doesn't necessarily give you that explicit permission to do that. There may be pockets of the field that do, but in general, it's probably not talked about much. So I'm wondering, so at some point, did you give yourself permission to integrate or augment, like you say? Or
I just kind of let fly. I think you've
Yeah.
learned about me, Mike, that I'd rather ask for forgiveness than permission.
Sure.
So.
Okay.
Once it really started, again, I could tell that it was about to come out me no matter what.
I meant giving
I
yourself permission, not
I just
not
let fly.
external, but just
Oh, no,
giving
I just
yourself
let
permission.
fly.
You just kind of
I let fly.
You let fly. Okay.
Again, as long as I'm not in the room with a hardcore atheist, it's usually not going to necessarily feel like it's
So it
going
just
to
kind of
come
just
out of me
started
then.
naturally happening. It just kind of,
Very organically.
very organically. Interesting.
Since you've been here.
Yes.
Oh.
Yes, but I am realizing in hindsight that I've probably been channeling as far back as lifespan when I was doing outpatient. I just had no idea that that was not me. I did not know that what was coming through my crown and out my mouth was not my intuition. Because the spiritual awakening happened after I started working here. So yeah. So I appreciate everybody who has joined us today, and I really appreciate you guys having a listen, and I will put together, I guess, an email and share the links for the books for anyone who is so inclined to take a look.
Can you mention about the recording too?
Oh yes, I am recording, and I will be asking Ian, for anybody who's not been able to join, how to actually like make that accessible, because I don't know. I will find out, and once it is, then I will share that out as well. So
Thank you.
thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.